Hello, this is Cal, and I am back with the second episode of explaining every episode of 911. So today we're going to be talking about Season 1, Episode 2, titled Let Go. And this is the first in a long series of episode titles where they were like, where's the nail? We need to hit it right on the head. And they did that because that is the theme of the entire episode is different characters letting go of things that are keeping them a bit mentally stuck. And you might be thinking, since last episode had barely any Hen especially, but also Chim content, maybe this is it. Maybe this is the episode where we learn more about Hen and Chim. No, we learn more about Buck, Athena, and Abby. So unfortunately, it's just like an extension to their character introductions from the first episode, which isn't to say I don't love getting more Buck and Athena time, especially. But yeah, I would have loved it if the first few episodes were a bit more balanced. So keep that in mind that we don't learn much more about Hen until later in the season, and Chim's episode is next episode. And then I know I gave this warning last episode about the heavier content in 911, and that's just a general warning for the series. But I will take a moment to say that this episode in particular deals with a lot of themes surrounding suicide, as well as a very dubious consent situation in a sex scene. So I won't be getting into like graphic details, but that's just some of the content. Season 1 comes out swinging with the heavy topics. So let's get into it. So the first scene, the opening scene of this episode, we are at a fair, I think they call it a county fair later in the episode. And there are two young men lined up for a roller coaster, and the one is pretty pumped for it, and the other is really nervous. They're side characters, but I feel like I should name the one of them just because he's like a recurring topic of conversation across the episode, and his name is Devin. Devin is the very nervous one. He doesn't want to go on this roller coaster. He's afraid that he's going to be kind of cowardly and embarrass himself in front of people, and his friend is like, come on, like, it's not that big of a deal. So they get on the roller coaster, and it's going over the loop or something. I don't really know at what point during the ride it happens, but at some point when they're like upside down or going down very fast, something like that, the bar that fastens them, holds them in, opens, and the friend that was more confident flies out of the roller coaster. And that's kind of our opening scene. And this was actually the call that they used to kind of advertise the first season on posters and stuff. So the 118 is called, and at this point, the roller coaster is suspended sort of upside down. And Devin, the friend who's very nervous, is kind of hanging on. He's about to fall out, and all he needs to do is hang on and wait for Buck to come get up the roller coaster to get him. Buck is sent up in like a harness on up the ladder to climb out and secure Devin from falling. They have like a kind of slip over harness for this. And there are other girls in the back of the cart. There are two other young women who are like right behind Devin, but they didn't fall out of their cart. Their seat bar stayed fastened, so they're okay. So there's three people up there, but one of them is only in imminent danger. And so Bobby is like, "Are you cool doing this?" And Buck is like, "Yes, this daredevil hero stuff is what I signed up for." And Bobby's like, okay, like that was too much. Go up and get him. But anyways, he sends him up. Buck gets over there. He's successful. He's not having a bad time at all. Right before he can save Devin all he has to do basically is reach out and take Buck's hand, and he chooses not to. He chooses to let go and fall to his death instead, right in front of Buck. And as you can imagine, this is particularly traumatic for poor Buck. We cut to back at the firehouse, which is presumably the next day or the next shift, and Buck is kind of withdrawn and very quiet. He's not eating, he's not really hungry. and he's kind of just staring blankly. He's clearly very like thinking about this loss still. Notably, this is also where we get the first use of a nickname that a lot of different characters will use for him across the show, and that's Chim calls him Buckaroo, which I feel like has dropped off in recent seasons, but that's a nickname that people will include a lot in like fics and fandom and stuff. So notably, it originates here with Chimney. Anyways, Buck is clearly very upset, and Bobby and Chimney, who are in the kitchen with him, are trying to give him some advice on how to process loss as a firefighter. He says he's never lost anybody before, and he's been on the job for 4 months at this point, and he's never lost anyone. So obviously, we did see somebody die last episode. We saw the jumper at the beginning of the episode die in front of Buck. So it's interesting that he says this. It's obviously, I think he means that he's never lost anybody where he's responsible for the death. I think he has seen people die on the call, and he kind of clarifies that later in the episode that he says there's been times where we've been too late arriving, but I think this is the first death that he means he could have prevented and didn't. So obviously, this is something that is quite impactful for Buck. Interestingly enough, the advice he gets is mostly that he needs to kind of find a way to move past it, to kind of put it behind him. For example, Chimney says, look, people die, and that's part of the gig, right? So your problem is you're looking at every job like it's a long-term relationship. They're one-night stands, man. In that moment, they mean everything to you, but once the morning comes, it's on to the next one, which I think is bad advice. It's not that I think that Chim is trying to give bad advice here. I think he's trying to maybe give advice in the language he thinks Buck will understand, given Buck's previous behavior. But I don't think this matches Chim's overall character or belief on the value of human life, as we come to see. And I don't think it's very helpful to Buck. I think it's very common for people to interpret Buck as neurodivergent, whether that be on like the autism spectrum or ADHD. I believe Oliver Stark plays him with ADHD in mind, given a tweet that he once made, I think. So I think for Buck, telling him to like stop thinking about something is not going to be very helpful. I think he's probably somebody that spirals a lot about things that he feels are unresolved. So I don't think that Chim was trying to give Buck bad advice, but he did. During this conversation, Hen brings Athena into the station. As we learned last episode, Hen and Athena are friends outside of work. And Hen brings her up and she says that Athena's having a bad time at home, so it would be good if like she could have lunch with them. She just needs like the family cooked meal, whatever. And Chim and Bobby greet her really warmly. Interestingly enough, they have her and Bobby hug, which I think is kind of interesting given things that come later, but I will not say anything about that. I guess I just did, but I won't say anything more. And then they explain to Athena what's going on with Buck. Athena, very interestingly, addresses the tension she and Buck had last episode. She kind of says, like, I wasn't sure about you two yet, but you did save my life. So I'm going to give you another chance. And that is actually the only time we really see him smile at the beginning of this episode. He seems like genuinely relieved and delighted to be forgiven by Athena and given a second chance. So I think it shows that he, even though he acted kind of cocky and like a jerk to her a lot of the time last episode, he does actually genuinely care a lot what people, especially people who are in like a authority position or people that he views as competent and important, he cares what they think about him. Athena has a bit better advice for Buck. She asks, do you know why they make us wear these uniforms? Cops, firefighters, and paramedics. It's also for our own good, because when we take the uniform off at the end of the day, it symbolizes letting go of all the sad, crazy, and inhumane things we've seen that day. So I do think this is sincere and helpful wisdom for Buck. I think it's better than Chim's idea, but again, they're both trying to tell him to like put it behind him or like find a way to compartmentalize it. But more than that, I do think that it's actually really good insight into Athena's character. I think it shows that she's somebody who can easily compartmentalize her parts of her life most of the time, but not always. And we're going to see that later this episode. But I think it really ties into that theme of control that we see with her across the season. She usually has a really good mental handle on the job and on the job stressors. And she kind of follows this rule for herself of the job is one part of my life, my family is another, and those things are separate, which I think we do see come into play with her identity as a police sergeant and what that means for her largely across other seasons. But I just think that's an interesting piece of insight into Athena, how she thinks that she can wear one hat and then wear another at home and they're completely separate. And I think this is better advice for Buck, being like, you have to find a way to kind of take it off your shoulders. But I still think it's not the advice that he needs. We move to Abby, who is in her apartment getting ready for work and waiting for the PSW to show up to take over care of her mom while she's working. We saw last episode that she has some trouble finding PSWs who are on time and seem as involved as her in her mother's care as Abby is. She's a little put off by the kind of the attitude of some of the ones she's had in the past. And while she's waiting for this PSW to arrive, she sees a news reel on the TV or a news highlight of Buck being interviewed after the roller coaster call at the county fair. Obviously, this was like at a big event in town. So, in town, it's Los Angeles. I don't know where the fucking county fair would have been. But obviously, this was a very publicized death. There were two deaths of the boy who fell initially and then Devin. So this was like a big thing. It's all over the news, and Buck is being interviewed. And Abby sees him for the first time. Last episode, she only heard his voice, so she can see not only his age, but his kind of objectively attractive appearance. Many of us find Oliver Stark attractive. Many of us find Buck attractive, but I think the show is playing Buck as objectively attractive for a young man. But anyways, so she sees all this, and she also sees that while he's kind of being put in the spotlight for being the hero who climbed up the roller coaster and did manage to save the two women who were stuck in the cart, he doesn't feel like that, and he's very uncomfortable being interviewed, and he's still reeling from what's happened. So she kind of notices that. She kind of remembers him and how he was kind to her in the last episode on the phone call, and that's like a brief glimpse into Abby's kind of reignited interest in Buck after him being very, very kind to her and calling her a hero last episode. Then we meet a pretty important supporting character who will be over the course of many seasons of 911, and that is Carla Price. She is the PSW who shows up to help care for Abby's mother, Patricia. And Carla right away is shown as somebody who is very sympathetic and competent. Not only does she care deeply about the people who she's charged with looking after, but she also is very good at it. She's on time, she's punctual, she's polite, like she knows what to do. And Abby is like immediately very, very relieved to have her there. So we can see that it looks like Abby might finally be getting some help. And not only that, but somebody who can kind of validate her in the experience that she's going on right with her mom right now. Then we cut to Athena's house in the morning again. She is getting ready for work. Everybody's just getting ready for work all the time. We see her and Michael getting ready for work, and the only really important thing to note here is that one, she's still not really talking to Michael. She's still very cold with him and doesn't really want any help from him. And two, May, their daughter, has decided she's sick. They're not sure if they believe her, but she's not getting out of bed. She's saying she's sick. And when it pans away, she looks very upset and sad, but they're not sure if she has any actual symptoms. She's staying home from school sick. That's what you need to know. The next call we get to see is one that focuses on Athena, Hen, and Chim, which is kind of a fun trio. I would like to see more of that. But anyways, a man calls from a home saying he's being attacked by dogs, and Athena shows up. The first thing she does is kind of commandeer a drive-through using her police sirens to order cheeseburgers from a kind of fast food joint. And then she shows up at the house where Hen and Chim are unable to reach the victim of this dog attack because there are two Dobermans in the kitchen still who have bitten this man and who are trying to get at him. He's climbed on top of something they can't reach, but Hen and Chim can't get in to help him. Chim, once again, is like, oof, not dealing with this. I am afraid. So that's like two animals we now know Chim is canonically afraid of. He's afraid of dogs and he's afraid of snakes. Although I don't know if he's afraid of dogs generally, because we do see him interact with them fine later, but it seems like maybe he's afraid of like some dogs, quote unquote, scary dogs. And Hen, of course, is the one who kind of knows all the dog behavior and how to handle the situation, kind of like she did with the snake last episode. Athena comes in, she uses the burgers to lure the dogs away, locks them in a room, and they get the man down. The man then starts sort of flirting with Athena to the point where she doesn't really question why he would be being attacked by strange dogs in a home that he's in. Like, when do you get attacked by dogs in your own house when you're home alone? That's kind of weird. She doesn't even question it because his flirting kind of sort of distracts her and Hen and leads into a discussion of Hen being like, well, why didn't you flirt back? And she's like, because I'm wearing a wedding ring and he flirted with me. Like, that's fucked up. And we have this conversation between them where it's very clear that Athena takes the bonds of marriage very seriously and she would not pursue any sort of relationship while she and Michael are still married, even if she knows that there's no romantic future there and Michael wouldn't necessarily be upset with her because he's gay. Hen does say, spoiler alert, your husband likes boys, which I think is probably one of the funniest lines to me in these early episodes. And it's also just like ridiculous. I think it's really interesting to note the advice that Hen does give Athena in this scene. Not because the scene is at all really about Hen, but I do think it gives us some insight to her character that may be important later without getting into anything. But Hen does say, whatever happens between you and Michael, these next few months are gonna be hell. So, whatever you need to do to get through it so that you can be there for your kids and yourself, you might want to do it. So, that's kind of Hen advocating for Athena to date outside of her marriage if she feels like that's what she needs to do at this point, knowing that the marriage is over. And I think Hen, who is a lesbian herself and who's a queer person, can obviously tell that this marriage is over and that Michael's not coming back from this, right? But I don't think Athena's quite there yet. But anyways, I think it shows that while Athena sees the bonds of marriage as completely black and white, doesn't matter if Michael's gay, they're still married. Hen can contextualize this a bit more, and she can kind of see the gray areas and the nuances there, not only as Athena's friend and somebody who she cares about a lot, but also maybe as somebody who has some time in the past gone through her own coming out process. I mean, we don't hear that specifically, but that's kind of how I'm reading it. I think it also shows that we see Hen as somebody who thinks sex is a way to process emotional stress or overcome emotional stress. And I don't think she's necessarily advocating for infidelity, but I do think that that's an interesting tidbit given where Hen's character does go later. That's like literally all we get from Hen though this episode. That's like the only really defining character thing about her is that she knows how to handle dogs, and she tells Athena that if she needs to have sex outside of her marriage, she can. So once again, just waiting for the day that these episodes include more Hen. It will come. It's just not today. After this conversation between Athena and Hen, the man who was attacked by the Dobermans has left. Animal control has come to pick up the dogs, and we see another man arrive back at the residence. And he's like, what the fuck is happening here? Where are my dogs? And so, obviously, the man being attacked by a pair of really nicely looking bred Dobermans is the burglar breaking into this nice Hollywood Hills type home, and the man coming home was the one being burglarized. So Athena and Hen didn't really notice this, which I put a little bit more on Athena as the police sergeant in this scenario. But you can see immediately that Athena is really angry to have been tricked by this man who is presenting himself one way and who is uh, not what he seems. So this is just one of the show's many heavy-handed metaphors that they will do, where a call mimics a struggle that the character is going through in real life. There you have it. Um, Athena is absolutely pissed that this burglar made a fool of her and tricked her. We switch again to Abby, who is now home after her shift of work, and Carla is still there. And it's showing that Carla is just doing a really good job taking some of the stress off Abby's shoulders, and Abby actually has a chance to kind of relax, which is nice. Abby is so appreciative for help, and I think so lonely in the kind of prison of the caregiving that she's doing, that she actually, like, honestly, first day talking to somebody that is helpful to her and kind to her, and she's just like, can you stay for a glass of wine after taking care of my mom all day? And Carla's like, yes, absolutely, and does that and overshares about her life, but it's okay. We forgive you, Carla. Really interesting. While her and Carla are having this conversation, Abby says that she mostly blames her breakup that she mentioned last episode, even though it was Tommy, her ex, that initiated the breakup. She mostly blames it on having to care for her mother. She says that once her mother moved in, it was hard to have any sort of intimate life or feel like sexy or anything because her mother was always right there. And this is really sad. Uh, like, she had to choose between those two parts of her life. And obviously, she chose her duty to her mom, which is completely understandable. But it shows that being in this caregiver role really makes Abby feel like she's not desirable. Then they're watching TV, or the TV's kind of on in the background of their conversation, and another interview with Buck comes on the news, and Abby is like, holy shit, it's Buck. And Carla's like, oh my god, you know this guy, this very young, very handsome firefighter. And she's kind of like, yeah, I've been thinking about calling him just to like see how he's doing. And Carla's like, oh my god, like, firefighters are dogs. Do you really want to call him? Like, all firefighters are dogs. And that's just really funny considering Carla's later role in the show. But Abby says, and I think it gives you kind of insight into her character. She says, look, you know what? I save people's lives every day, and he is the first person in years that has actually said, thank you, Abby. Great job. You're a hero too. And he needs help, you know. I mean, he's got so much pain in his face. Everybody's treating him like a hero, but he doesn't feel like a hero. And I think that this is half genuine empathy and half projection. While I do believe that Abby believes what she's saying about Buck and does definitely see an aspect of what's going on with him that other people in his life, like Chim, didn't necessarily see, I think she's also chasing that feeling of connection and companionship that we see her kind of chasing that with Carla the minute Carla kind of validates her. And obviously, Buck is the first person that said those really nice things to her, so she's chasing that with him too. And, like, let's face it, seeing how young and attractive Buck is made her feel good about herself and visible when she's just admitted that being a caregiver makes her feel unattractive after, Buck said all those really great things to her. So I think that there is like a genuine level of empathy for what Buck's going through that I believe is there, but I also think that she is seeking these relationships because she is so lonely and burnt out. Carla convinces her to call Buck despite feeling like a lot older and kind of inappropriate. So she does pull his number from their work report record from the call last episode, which is just like not a great look to take his personal phone number from what I'm assuming would be like a police incident report. Um, but also just not the worst thing we'll see somebody do on this show. So I can't really be mad at her without being mad at other people as well. And while I think that this behavior obviously crosses a boundary, I don't think it's super indicative of any creepiness or predatory behavior like it's sometimes made out to be by people who don't like Abby. Not an Abby defender again, but I think I think people overstate the importance of this. I think it goes back to that burnt out piece. She doesn't really care about her job or the kind of ethical considerations of her job right now as much as she cares about the human companionship piece she's lacking. So does that make taking Buck's number from a report right? No, but I do think that's the motivation. Importantly, it's I think like an interesting moment. Abby does pause to look at herself in the mirror before she calls Buck. And I think because we know she doesn't feel good about herself overall, it's natural to think that she'd be insecure about her age and her looks when calling Buck. Connie Britton is obviously a very beautiful woman, and Abby is a very beautiful character, but she feels burnt out, like I said. She feels older than she'd like to be while still single, and she is unsure of her self in her life and if her circumstances make her desirable in any way. So I do think it's interesting that she is very aware of herself when making this call, and she's very insecure about herself when making this call, having just seen Buck on the TV and like describing him as this young hunky firefighter. So that's interesting to me. Buck is really appreciative of getting the call from Abby. I don't think he's used to having people check in on him. We know last episode he said that the job is all he has. So even if Bobby and the rest of the team are kind of checking in on his mental state following Devin's death, maybe he sees that as part of their job, whereas Abby calling out of what seems to be complete altruism would be very novel for Buck. Abby is able to relate to Buck having been on the other end of calls where people have died, and she understands kind of the mental toll that is taking on him. And she gives him the advice that, like, it's not really on him because he did everything he could, and sometimes people don't want to be saved. Whether or not you agree with that take, that is Abby's hot take on suicidal ideation. I have seen that debated online and stuff. I'm not here to comment on that, but that is the advice that Abby does give to Buck, and he seems to kind of roll with that and not feel better, but I mean, maybe it takes a bit of a weight off his shoulders. I also feel like it bears mentioning that this season, whenever they call, almost every single time, it's at work for Buck. Like, he's actively on the job. Like, he's putting out a brush fire when she calls him this time, and he picks up the phone. Every time he picks up the phone, it does not matter what he's doing. Like, he didn't even know who was calling. He picked up the phone. Like, okay, why didn't you get written up for that one, Buck? They end the call being kind of like weirdly dorkily flirty, especially dorkily on Abby's side. Like, she's kind of awkward, but Buck's very much into it. And they say that they're going to call each other again soon. So there is definitely like an energy going on there. The next scene we cut to is actually Buck going to Devin's funeral. He sits in the back. He's kind of out of sight, but I feel like for Buck that this was trying to get closure. Like I said, I do read him as neurodivergent and maybe somebody that would really fixate and spiral on things that he feels aren't resolved. So I think going to the funeral for him, while not something he usually does for people who die on calls he's on, would help him feel some sort of closure. I don't think he's intending to do anything there. But the sister of Devin does notice him, and she's clearly pretty upset to see him. And she confronts him in the funeral chapel, and it doesn't go well. He basically fumbles his explanation of what happened and said it was like Devin just quit. He just gave up, which really, really upsets the sister. And she's like, he wanted to live. He was very happy to live. He wanted to be alive, and you failed him. She says that to Buck, and that obviously hits him like a fucking dagger to the chest. He's very upset about this, which I think is interesting when we juxtapose this with at the very beginning of the episode, he was like, I'm here for the hero Daredevil stuff. And in last episode, he's like, oh, see the fire, put out the fire. The rest is blah, blah. It's very clear that that's not really how Buck feels, that he does take saving lives and helping people as very important. And that failing to do so when he knows he physically could have, like he had time, he was physically able to, and he still couldn't. I think that really, really messes with him, and having the sister obviously angry with him will add to that. Understandable from the sister's point of view, like the firefighter who, in your perspective, dropped your brother, shows up at the funeral and tells you he wanted to kill himself, kind of, or wanted to die. But yeah, definitely not true, and it messes Buck up a little bit. Then we have another call where somebody is hanging and could fall to their death. It's a window washer that's kind of fallen off the side of a high-rise building and is kind of dangling from his cables. And initially, Bobby wants to put Buck in like the harness to go save him, but Buck sort of freezes up and suggests a different role for himself where he's working the winch from the roof instead, leaving somebody else to do the rope rescue part. And obviously Bobby notices this, like literally just 2 days ago, he was saying how much he wants to do the Hero Daredevil stuff. And now he's like, no, thank you. So clearly Bobby can see that Buck has been really affected by what's happened. They sit down after the call and Buck apologizes for letting Bobby down. That's the phrase. He said, I'm really sorry I let you down, which is interesting because obviously Bobby never frames it as that. He just wants to talk to him about what's going through his head. But I think that kind of gives us some insight into how Buck sees his job and his role and his value on the team. And then they get to kind of talking about why Buck's on the job. And Buck says, a year ago, I put in to be a Navy SEAL. You don't have to be in the Navy to try out for the SEALs. You just have to be particularly badass, which you know I am. I didn't have any trouble with the physical part. Following orders wasn't my best quality, but hey, I was working on it. And then Bobby asks, why didn't it stick? And Buck says, they wanted machines, people who could flip a switch in their head and turn off every natural human instinctive emotion in their body, and I cannot do that. I don't want to. I don't want to do that. I love this job because I get to be the tough guy, but I also get to help people. Which I think is really interesting because even though he's saying out loud that he doesn't want to be the person to flip off that switch, we see that's what he tries to do a few times in early season 1. He does try to be the person who like doesn't care and is above it all and can just operate without having too many emotions about it and be very tough. But obviously that facade always cracks, and we can always see that he is somebody that cares a lot about the people that he's helping and is a lot more vulnerable than maybe he'd like to come across. Bobby says, I'm glad you can't flip that switch. I don't want you to. It's not going to make you a better firefighter, and anybody who tells you that losing someone doesn't affect them is lying. And I think that this is likely one of the first times in Buck's adult life that someone has told him that that softer, more emotional side of him is preferable. Obviously, we don't have a lot of context for that yet in episode 2, but given what we kind of learn about him later, I do think that's true. And then Bobby also tells him that he does need to talk to somebody about this and refers him to a department psychologist. Buck does go to the psychologist, so you can see that he's taking Bobby's advice seriously and that he kind of does want to get through this, even though it's very clear right off the bat that therapy isn't something he's very comfortable with. And we get this sort of montage, or not, I don't know if montage is the right word, but a scene that cuts back and forth. And on the one hand, we have Buck in his kind of trauma therapy session. And in the other hand, we have Athena and Michael in a couples counseling session. And I'm going to talk about these separately, even though they're really flipping back and forth between each other in the scene. But to start with Athena and Michael, they are talking about where their marriage is going forward. And Athena says that she feels like she's been made a fool out of, and it really breaks her heart, and she feels stupid because she did know deep down that Michael was gay. Like when he said that to her last episode, she thinks that he was correct and that deep down she did know, even if she never wanted to admit it. And then Michael says that he's the fool, not her. And he says, I let you love me because I thought you could fix me, which is a really sad way to show his motivations, right? They were never to deceive her. And he thought there was something wrong with him, was very uncomfortable with his sexuality. And he did want the same vision of a family as she did, just for different reasons. So it's a very sad, raw scene between the two of them. And when it ends with them talking about like where they're going to go going forward, Athena's like, we could just stay married and just never have sex. Like, I'm okay with that because I love you and you love me. And like, we work great and our kids are great. Like, let's just stay together. And Michael does tell her that he has met somebody and he would like to pursue that. So he does not want to stay in a sexless platonic marriage, which is interesting, right? Because Athena earlier said that she wouldn't want to date outside her marriage no matter what, even if she knows that Michael isn't in love with her. And clearly he did not have the same outlook on this. So that's a very interesting little point that I think we can empathize with Michael a lot with what he's going through, but at the end of the day, he still did kind of disrespect her in that sense by seeing somebody outside their marriage, even though, it was in the name of kind of discovering his sexuality and repression and all that, but when clearly she holds that value very dearly. So interesting juxtaposition between their two stories there. And obviously that scene ends with Athena being very upset. Now, on Buck's end, this is kind of a more upsetting scene, and I'm not sure that I understand totally why they made this decision. I can see some of it, but it's never a scene that's sat right with me in the show. Buck is very hesitant to get into the therapy. He doesn't really like talking about his feelings, and it's pretty clear that he hasn't had a lot of outlets to do that before. He's struggling, but he does get into it. He does try, and we see him start to get pretty vulnerable, and he's crying, and the therapist crosses the room and starts kind of touching his knee and being very like sweet and soft with him and definitely physically inappropriate. And then he's like, wait, like, you added me on Facebook. You tried to add me as a friend on Facebook. And she's like, oh, well, that was before the session was booked. And the session ends with the therapist and Buck having sex. Huge ethical violation, huge power dynamic imbalance, and definitely tantamount to sexual assault in a way. So not great there. I wouldn't say Buck considers that as bad as it was, especially in the moment. He seems pretty happy after the session because I think it was a way for him to take the easy way out and make himself feel better in the moment and not have to actually address those hard feelings. But we do, I think, later see kind of how this affects him in this episode. So therapy is a no-go for Buck, and that therapist is, a predator. After the revelation that Michael has been cheating on her, Athena goes and hunts down the burglar that tricked her earlier in the episode at the dog attack. She really kind of toys with him to get him to kind of come out and reveal himself in public, and then she's pretty forceful in arresting him, which isn't the first time that we will see her using excessive force as a police sergeant on the show. And as bad as that is, I think the important thing to note in this scene is that she is absolutely taking her frustrations with Michael and the circumstances she feels out on the perpetrator. And she even kind of yells things at him that she would want to yell at Michael, like, you think you can make a fool out of me, you can't, that kind of stuff. And I think it's interesting because at the beginning of the episode, she was so clear that, she can separate work and personal life by wearing that uniform or not. And I think it shows that maybe that's true most of the time, but during periods of heightened emotional stress, she's unable to do that. And clearly her personal stressors and her personal emotions leak into her work and affect her work as a police sergeant. So I think that Athena's perception of her objectivity and her actual execution of it are very different. And I think that's a very important aspect to her character throughout the entire show. We regroup with the 118, and they are on another call, which involves the possibility of somebody plummeting to their death. Excellent. Thank you, 911. We love the consistent theme. This is a man who is threatening to jump off the balcony of his building after he finds out his girlfriend cheated on him. Fun little ties to both Athena and Buck there. Yes, he is threatening suicide, but they very much make it seem like this man is not suicidal, that he is weaponizing the threat of hurting himself in an argument with his girlfriend. And again, Buck is the person tasked with being the one to do the dangerous work to get him down. He does that. He pulls it off successfully after initial hesitation, where even he's like, I don't want to do it. And Chim is like, I'll do it. And that's kind of important because we do see in later episodes Chim volunteering to do more dangerous stuff and Bobby kind of overlooking him for Buck. But Bobby makes Buck do it because he needs him to know that he can, and he does. So that goes well, and we do see Buck getting some of his confidence back. They return to the station, and Devin's sister comes to apologize to Buck for blaming him. She does say that she actually did know her brother was suicidal and that he was struggling with it, and that she was aware, and it's not Buck's fault, and she feels like it's her fault for pushing him to go to that fair anyways, and she feels like it's her fault he died. And it's neither of their fault, and Buck reassures her about that and says that, like, they only did what they could, and kind of repeats the advice that Abby gave to him, which I'm not sure if that's the right thing to tell her, but whatever. It seems to have helped. And they end that conversation with Buck having the kind of closure and resolution that he needed, where he no longer feels so guilty and personally responsible for Devin dying, even though he knows that he'll never really be able to let go of the pain and sadness at the first person he lost, which is kind of exemplified a bit earlier when he's talking to Bobby, and Bobby says that he can still clearly remember the first woman he was unable to save. So even though those deaths and that trauma don't leave you, you are able to move forward and let go, as the episode title suggests. After this, we see Abby out with Carla and her mom at a restaurant, which is, I think, really important. We don't ever see Abby going out and doing anything with her mom because it's also overwhelming. But now that she has Carla in her life, I think that physical setting that they're actually going out to like a little place to eat because the mom is well enough to do that is a big important thing, and it kind of shows that Abby is putting herself in other settings of just work and home, which home has become work. So that's important for Abby. And Carla convinces her to call Buck and ask him on a date. So she does. Again, Buck does take this call on the job, but she asks him out and he says no. He says that he's realized that he has some intimacy issues with women specifically, and then he jumps too quickly to sex. So Buck says, no, I don't want to go on a date with you right now because I think if we went on a date, I would just move too quickly to sex. But I really like you. I think you're special, and I would like to keep calling you. Can we keep calling each other? And Abby says yes. And she is very happy about this, and she's proud of herself for trying it and putting herself out there, even if he said no. And I think that this is really interesting. So we see that both Abby and Buck are people who are very desperately seeking companionship and an emotional outlet from very lonely situations. Buck has said he literally has nothing outside of work, and Abby feels like she is stuck between work and being a caregiver all the time. They're both very lonely. One of the big draws to Buck for Abby, in my opinion, is that he brings her back to life from that stuck, burnt out place that she's in. And I think one of the big draws for Buck to Abby is that she very much validates and brings out this softer emotional side of him that is truly the core of who he is, that he has felt like he had to hide before, but that's the part of him that she likes. So it's a good relationship for him in that way, where it reinforces him being who he actually is. I think the difference is, and we can see in this scene, Buck is invested in the outcome, and that's why he says no, right? He doesn't want it to mess it up, so he's very careful with it, and he doesn't want to do anything that would jeopardize the long-term dynamic between himself and Abby, whereas Abby isn't so invested in the outcome. She's okay that he said no because really it was about how it made her feel about herself in the moment. And I think that that is the big difference between Abby and Buck and what they are seeking from each other. He is invested in how that will end up. She is invested in how it makes her feel today. Important to hold on to, and no bad intentions on either side, but definitely they're both thinking something different, even though they're both seeking the same sort of companionship. So now we get to 911's first big cliffhanger ending and first big main character near-death experience. 911 is kind of famous for doing this. They nearly kill a main character several times a season. It's what they do. It's almost always not permanent. But this one, I think, for this being the first one of the whole season, is pretty traumatic. Athena comes home from work. She sees Harry, her son, and she's like, "Where's your sister?" And he said she's in her room. So Athena goes to check on May. And when she opens the door, she finds May having overdosed on painkillers from an old dental surgery of Athena's, and she thinks she's dead. She calls 911 to report the overdose and that she thinks May is dead, and that is how the episode ends. Very rough because May is a child, like she's a teenager, and also Athena is obviously like horrified. It's a really really heavy scene. It's awful. Not to make light of it at all, because we will talk about it more and May's motivations and everything more in the next episode. But I do feel like now is the time to introduce a near-death experience counter for our main characters. So every time a main character, main cast member, or somebody who will be a main cast member at some point, I'm not sure if May is in season 1, almost dies, we're just gonna tally up one. So I'm very sorry, May Grant, one of my favorites on the show. I'm sorry it had to be you first. And again, not to make light of what happened, it's awful. Some of them are funnier than this. Most of them are funnier than this. But this show almost kills everybody all the time. I'm just warning you right off the bat. Okay, so to wrap up the episode, we had Let Go as the title, the theme of, putting stuff behind you. Athena is struggling to let go of her marriage, and it kind of takes Michael saying that he's cheated on her for her to finally wrap her head around the fact that it's over, at which point she's very angry. Buck has to let go of his first loss on the job, which he gets a lot of differing advice on how to do, and finally figures that out through, not trying to push the memory away, but trying to, reason about his own involvement in it and move forward and talk to people. Maybe not a therapist, as we've seen in this episode, but somebody like Abby who can relate to him, or Bobby also who can relate to him. And Abby is trying to kind of let go of her insecurities in order to pursue something that makes her feel good about herself. So that's kind of where the episode stands. And then obviously we know that the next episode will be dealing with the aftermath of May's overdose, which is quite traumatic for our characters. I like this episode overall. I think it gives a lot of really great insight into Buck, Abby, and Athena's characters. I don't love the therapist scene. That is a bad scene. And I do think that in the first several episodes of this season, it's pretty heavy-handed with all the suicide references. I still do appreciate the episodes overall. And I think that if you watch the first episode and you're struggling with Buck's character, I do think you get a better perspective of him in the second episode. So that's it. That's episode 2. That's Let Go. Okay, I'll talk to you soon.